When I asked why I had taken the liberty of creating a family card for my adopted family, John laughed and said, "We're family, so having a family card is only natural, right? Do you have any complaints? If you can figure out who took you in when you were all alone, then you shouldn't be able to say such things, right?" His arrogant tone was unlike anything I had heard before, and I fell silent involuntarily. Was John always like this? If you're grateful, you should serve my family more. Then, I'll consider you part of the family too. Until then, it's more like a provisional membership. I had never heard of provisional membership in marriage before. Without saying a word, John emphasized it further, saying, "In other words, you're not an official member of the family yet. If you don't like it, you can leave anytime. Right now, our family is still just the 5 of us. Useless parasites are not welcome." I understand. As a result, I canceled all of my credit cards and moved. My name is Emily, 27 years old, a freelance illustrator. I used to work as a designer at a major advertising agency. But I became independent 2 years ago when I got married, and now I work from home. My parents died in an accident when I was young. I was raised by my maternal grandparents, but when I went to college, I moved back to the apartment near the city where I had lived with my parents. And I have been living here ever since. I met my husband, John, at the Italian restaurant where he worked. It was a nice place with a good atmosphere, reasonable prices, and great food. So my colleagues and I started going there often. At the time, there was a discussion about a handsome waiter, and that was John. He was indeed good-looking. Some of the regulars at the restaurant came just to see John. And the manager once said that a certain percentage of the customers came for him. Which I could understand because he was such an attractive man. I won't deny that I became one of his fans, thinking he was cool. He was such a noticeable presence. However, for some reason, we quickly became closer, and before I knew it, we were called a couple and, surprisingly, got married. I don't remember that time very well myself. I felt like I was drunk, and when I woke up, there was someone next to me calling me husband. But even then, I loved John and was happy. With marriage, I resigned from the company where I had been working as a designer and became independent. It was a smooth departure as I continued to do the same work I had been doing at the company. But now as an individual contractor. John continued to work at the Italian restaurant. And his working hours varied, sometimes ending late at night. Since working as before would be a bit difficult, and I had wanted to become independent for a while, I decided to take the plunge. I think it's a good idea. It will make things easier for you. And it's good to continue doing what you love. John agreed, and that's how our married life began. Neither of us liked extravagant things. So we decided not to have a wedding ceremony and just registered our marriage, planning to visit each other's families for introductions. John went to work, and I worked from home. Our schedules were irregular, but we kept in touch frequently, waiting for each other to come home and have dinner together. It was a fun and happy daily life. Oh, how I thought marriage was wonderful. But about a year after our marriage, John suddenly said something that would shatter everything. "My family wants to come visit next time. Is that okay?" I, of course, agreed. I had only met John's family briefly when we greeted them. So I thought it would be a good opportunity to get to know them better. Having lost my parents at a young age, I had also admired John's large family. But when the 4 members of my new extended family arrived, I was rendered speechless. "Hey, where's my room?" As soon as they entered the house, my sister-in-law said that. She was 32 years old, 5 years older than both John and me. And I heard she worked as a store clerk at a local supermarket. When we first met, they greeted me politely, but their recent rudeness took me by surprise. Along with my sister-in-law, there was also an 18-year-old stepsister, who, in contrast, didn't say a word and stood silently. Come to think of it, even when I met my stepsister during the initial greeting, she barely said anything. Upon my sister-in-law's urging, I guided both her and my stepsister to their guest rooms, while my in-laws stayed in the classic-style room that served as my parents' room. Since it was the only classic-style room in the apartment, I assumed my in-laws would prefer it. Once my in-laws and stepfamily settled into their respective rooms, my sister-in-law declared, "Well, since we're going to be living together from today, you better serve our family properly." I didn't quite understand what she meant, but when I looked at John for help, he wore an expression I had never seen before and laughed. As it turned out, my extended family had abandoned their own home and moved into my apartment. Sorry, they suddenly had to evacuate their old place. They had nowhere else to go. I wish they had told me about this situation in advance. I had assumed it would only be for a day or two, so this was truly unexpected. When I expressed my concern to John, he shook his head, looking ashamed. Just please let them stay until they find a new place. I couldn't refuse under those circumstances. It wouldn't be right to kick out people who had nowhere else to go, especially family members, without a clear plan. I reluctantly agreed to let them stay until they found a new place, with the promise that they would search for one as soon as possible. Little did I know that I would come to regret this decision. My in-laws showed no restraint whatsoever. From the day they all moved in, they didn't lift a finger, leaving everything to me and making demands as they pleased. They didn't show any effort in finding a new home or even looking for work. When I asked about their jobs, I was once again surprised. "Oh, I quit that cheap supermarket job," despite mentioning her job earlier. It turned out that my sister-in-law had only been working part-time. I had mistakenly assumed she was a full-time employee due to her age, but she admitted that she hadn't held a proper job since junior high. My in-laws had also quit their part-time jobs when they came here. Of course, my stepsister was unemployed as well. She had claimed to be preparing for exams, but it was a lie. Why bother working? We can't commute from here. And now that we're part of a wealthy family, there's no need to work, right? A wealthy family? Whose family were they talking about? When I asked in confusion, I received an even more surprising answer. It's you, silly. You got a ton of compensation and insurance money from your parents' accident. And you don't even have a mortgage on this apartment. You can afford to live it up. My sister-in-law said this with a mocking laugh. Bewildered, I protested to John when he returned home. But he became unexpectedly angry, raising his voice in a way I had never seen before. Everyone had to leave their homes suddenly and they're exhausted. Can't you cut them some slack? Or do you want to kick my family out so heartlessly, Emily? Shocked and speechless, I froze, and suddenly, John's tone softened. I'm sorry for raising my voice. I'm tired too, and today was particularly busy. Can you understand? Please bear with it a little longer. John was skilled at handling women. Looking back, he probably used a combination of sweet talk and sternness to control them. However, I didn't realize it at the time, and reluctantly accepted the situation for a little while longer. As a result, my in-laws' audacity continued to escalate. When they were at home, they treated me like a servant. And whenever they went out, they asked for money. Do you expect us to go job hunting with empty pockets? It's not a big deal, but if we can't find work, we'll end up staying here indefinitely. Reluctantly, I handed over some money, and of course, they claimed they couldn't find work and spent all the money before returning home. They probably weren't even looking for jobs. But if I said anything about it, they would all gang up on me and accuse me of being a liar without any evidence. Even if I told John when he came home, it wouldn't solve the problem. They're all frustrated because they can't find work. Sorry, just bear with it a little longer. I'll talk to them. With that, they would calm down, and over time, I felt it was useless to keep mentioning it. The frequency of them asking for money also decreased. But I never got the money I had given them back. After living like this for about 3 months, one day I realized something alarming. Why is the credit card bill so high? Could it be that someone's using it fraudulently? I hurriedly checked the credit card statements, and all of them were for the family card. Looking at the breakdown, it included various purchases such as food, drinks, books, games, and even expensive designers' bags and clothes. Each card had a number assigned to it, ranging from 1 to 5. In other words, there were 5 family cards issued. Currently, our credit card is in my name, but John was using these family cards. Emily, it seems like you're better at handling these things. And it's more convenient to consolidate payments, right? Can I leave it to you? So, I ended up managing them. But it appeared that these family cards had been issued without my knowledge. The reason my extended family had stopped asking for money was that they now had access to credit card payments and cash advances. Upon learning this, I became quite frustrated. I asked why they had created family cards without my consent, and John replied with a laugh. If I said we needed money, you'd complain, so there's no choice. Besides, do you remember who took you in when you had no one else? Can you say such things to the family of your benefactor? His arrogant tone, unlike anything I had heard before, left me speechless. Was this the real John? If you're grateful, then you should serve my family even more. If you do that, I'll accept you as part of the family. Until then, it's like a provisional permit. I had never heard of such a thing as a provisional permit in marriage. Speechless, I remained silent, and John emphasized his point. In other words, you're not an official family member yet. If you don't like it, you can leave anytime. Right now, there are only 5 members in our family. Parasitic freeloaders are not welcome. I realized John's true nature for the first time, and I was in shock, feeling as if all the blood had drained from my body. I began to consider divorce. Actually, I started to wonder how I ended up marrying John in the first place. I decided to start there. At first, I had only thought he was a cool guy. I thought of him as just another handsome guy. And I never really considered anything beyond that. But then, one day, when I left our seats to go to the restroom, John approached me. Emily, you seem different from the others, don't you think? Huh? I don't know how to describe it, but you have a certain mystique, maybe? I mean, sorry for saying this to a customer. It caught me off guard. That was the beginning, and gradually, I became more aware of John. Maybe that was part of a plan to make me like him. When I thought about it calmly, that seemed plausible. I remembered that after that conversation, John would come to our table for small talk. Perhaps he was drawn to my wealth and the apartment in the city. John was definitely not my type, to put it nicely. He had a modern, perhaps even a bit of a playboy charm. I preferred mature individuals who could engage in deep and quiet conversations. Nevertheless, I found myself falling for John. It was a mystery to me, and I began to feel a mixture of regret and embarrassment. John was what people called a handsome hunk. He was skilled at captivating women, especially someone like me who wasn't used to men and had just started her career. I had probably fallen for his strategy, and that's how we ended up getting married. Thinking about it made me want to break everything in the house out of frustration and shame. But I wasn't foolish enough to act on that impulse. I decided to endure a bit longer to plan my revenge. For that, I needed to keep up with our current life for a little while longer. The apartment where we currently lived was bought by my father shortly after I was born, with a loan. Back then, it wasn't that expensive, but later, with the development of a large shopping center nearby, the area skyrocketed in value. And it's now considered a luxury apartment. My parents, who wanted a big family, bought a spacious apartment so that it would accommodate an expanding family. Even with my extended family moving in, we managed to coexist. However, despite its relative size, it was just an apartment room. And it was becoming unbearable with my extended family around. But I endured it for the sake of revenge. As my sister-in-law had mentioned, there was no mortgage payment for this apartment. When I was 3 years old, both of my parents passed away in a traffic accident. It was a car accident on the highway when we were returning from my paternal grandfather's funeral. On that day, I was supposed to go with them. But I had a high fever due to the flu that was prevalent at the time. As a result, my maternal grandparents came to the apartment where my parents and I lived and took care of me. And so, I was left alone. The loan payments were covered by group credit life insurance from the insurance company. So, the only expenses I was paying were maintenance fees and property taxes. John looked at that amount and said he would contribute a little more to the household finances. Since there's no mortgage, if I chip in that much, can't we manage with your income? We can each pay for our own spending money, is that okay? Upon John's suggestion, I found myself agreeing. Up until then, I had been solely responsible for all the expenses. So if John was willing to contribute that much, it seemed like it would make things easier. Looking back, it was quite naive, but at the time, I think I was blinded by my affection for John. And I tended to go along with whatever he said. Perhaps John assumed he was the head of the household, the breadwinner who was feeding me. That's why he had no qualms about calling me a parasite and the like. But the reality was different. I was covering most of the expenses, including utilities, food, entertainment, and more. And now, with 5 additional people, true parasites, added to the mix, there was no way we could manage with that amount. I wanted desperately to get rid of these parasites as soon as possible. But I chose to turn a blind eye to it. They could go shopping as they pleased, and I clenched my teeth and endured. I would be the one to have the last laugh, enduring this difficult period while repeatedly reminding myself of that. And finally, the day to take action arrived, 3 months after I decided to divorce. I'm exhausted. Please make a clear choice between me and your extended family. That day, I confronted John with that final decision. He was surprised, but I continued. Not a single member of your extended family does any housework. As you know, I work from home even while I'm at home. I'm not just idling around. Yet, I'm treated as if I'm unemployed, and you tell me to know my place. I've had enough. Tears streamed down my face as I pleaded with John. When he saw me like that, he smirked and said, "Then, you should leave. As I've said before, you're not a true family member yet. Making such a fuss means you didn't pass the family membership test." I looked at John in shock. What's with the surprise? If you say you can't live with my family, then you have to leave, right? Oh, I'm not at fault at all. So I'll take this apartment as damages. I'll also take half of your savings as property division. So that was his intention all along. That's why my extended family had been harassing me, to force me out. I knew it, but hearing it so clearly still shocked me. Even though I understood, it was still shocking. After all, he was the person I had once loved enough to marry. But thanks to this, I had made up my mind. I understand. I decided to divorce John. However, this apartment belongs to me, and I'm not at fault either. What did you say? The reason for the divorce is that you allowed your extended family to live with me without consulting me, and they mistreated me. I told John firmly. He seemed surprised. Probably because he hadn't expected me to reject his offer so clearly. I had been obediently complying with his requests since we got married. Remembering that made me angry with myself. I don't want to be with any of you for even a second longer. So, I'm leaving now, but you should also prepare to leave. You can't be serious. This is our home, and you can't force out someone with a right of residence. Do you know what that means? You can't forcibly evict someone who lives here. While John yelled like that, I left the house and went to my grandparents' place. I explained the situation and asked to stay until things were resolved. Emily's grandparents were surprised and furious when they learned what I had been through. And they scolded me, wondering why I hadn't consulted them sooner. Tears welling up in their eyes. Grandpa or Grandma, I'm sorry for causing you worry. But it's okay, now. You know, even though I may seem quiet, I'm not really like that. I also had tears in my eyes as I forced a smile. The day after I left the apartment, I received a call from John. Hey, what was that all about? What do you mean by that? The certified letter. I was impressed by how quickly he had acted. I had left the divorce proceedings to the lawyer, but apparently, they had arranged for it to be delivered today after I informed them about leaving yesterday. I won't pay any damages, and I won't leave the apartment. But legally, you have an obligation to pay. And you don't have the right to keep living in that apartment. What are you talking about? Once we got married, this apartment became mine too. If you really want it, buy me out. Well, that was an absurd argument. Talking like this won't get us anywhere. Please handle everything through the lawyer from now on. I said that and hung up. He would probably call again tomorrow. But I didn't want to talk today. As expected, the next morning, I received another call. Hey, what was that all about? The exact same lines as yesterday. He really lacked creativity. What do you mean? My card isn't working. What did you do? What did I do? I canceled it. That card was mine, and you were just using the family card, remember? That's right, before leaving the house. I had switched all the contracts billed to that card to another one and canceled it. If I cancel mine, it's natural that the family card won't work anymore. I've been making payments too. Yes, for the apartment's maintenance fees and property taxes only. And only for the first 2 months. It's not a significant amount, but I can subtract it from the damages if you prefer. I said this in a mocking tone. And I heard some incomprehensible shouting from the other end of the phone. Yes, John had only paid the agreed amount for 2 months. He had made various excuses, but in the end, he had asked me to wait, and he never paid again. If he genuinely believed he had been paying, his memory was quite poor. But I didn't care anymore. I was done with this person, no matter how good or bad his memory was. So, please make sure to pay your share of the living expenses that I've been covering all this time. I've been keeping meticulous records, and I'll submit them all as evidence. Then divide the savings properly. It's marital property. Yes, I understand. Let's divide it fairly. When I said that, he left some parting words and hung up. Hey, what was that all about? And then, a few days later, I received the same line once again. It seemed that his poor memory extended to his vocabulary as well. What do you mean? The division of marital property. Why is it 0? You have plenty of insurance and alimony from your parents. So he still thought that way. I explained carefully that my pre-marriage savings weren't part of marital property. And post-marriage savings were 0, as expected. You're lying. If you think I'm lying, why don't you consult someone about it? Anyway, from now on, please go through the lawyer for everything. I won't talk to you directly anymore. Goodbye. I said that and blocked John's calls. 2 months after I left the house, John and his extended family finally left the apartment. There was no genuine change of heart or anything like that. They simply couldn't afford to live there anymore. With only John's income, it wasn't enough to support a family of 5. Well, that was to be expected. They had been using my card to go on shopping sprees. And even if they were told to tighten their belts now, there was no way they could endure it. I deliberately let them use the card as they pleased. Given my in-laws, I was sure it would turn out that way. My in-laws would pester John to let them go shopping, and when John hesitated, they started taking money from John's wallet. Even when John got angry, they would all blame him for kicking me out. On top of that, the electricity, gas, and water were all shut off. Of course, I had them shut off. I had notified the utilities that I wouldn't be living there for a while. John apparently demanded immediate restoration over the phone. But the apartment was in my name. And no one unrelated to me could have them restored, even if they begged. From the sweltering summer to the lingering heat of autumn, unable to endure, my in-laws finally left the apartment. I didn't know or care where they went. John was the only one who held out until the end, but with no electricity. And unable to use the bath, he eventually gave up and left too. The divorce proceedings progressed faster than I had expected. Not because John had reflected on his actions and agreed to the divorce under certain conditions, but because of something he did. While the divorce wasn't finalized yet, he had cheated. Or rather, he had started making such moves quite early. Perhaps because he thought he could get rid of me. He lured young women to his luxurious apartment in the prime location of the city, boasting about it. I thought he might do that, especially with his good looks. And it seemed he had been doing such things even before we got married. So, before leaving the house, I had set up cameras in several places. And they had all become evidence. Maybe he thought I had no such initiative. But he really underestimated me. As my spouse and the homeowner, I demanded a substantial amount of damages. Grouping together his actions of bringing my in-laws without my permission, creating a family card without consent, making me pay, kicking me out, and cheating. John turned pale when he saw the amount and desperately begged for reconciliation. But I had no intention of doing that, of course. Knowing that John couldn't afford such a payment, I encouraged him to borrow as much as possible from his company and collected as much as I could. When I mentioned that I could file fraud charges for creating the family card without my permission, he reluctantly complied. Well, I hope he does his best to repay his debts. The divorce was finalized, and for now, I'm staying with my grandparents. I haven't decided what to do with the apartment yet, but I might sell it. My parents left it for me, and I cherished it. But since I have no memories associated with it and it has led to this situation, they might forgive me for letting it go. My dream job as an illustrator is slowly picking up. I might consider living on my own again in the future. But it's a good era now. I can work efficiently even while staying at my grandparents' house. I'll rely on my grandparents a little longer, and then I'll look forward and continue walking. This time, I hope not to be deceived by a good-looking facade and find a partner with whom I can share my life.